begin to understand why they exist to begin with. Shia is an Arabic word actually that implies a helper or a friend. And the Holy Quran uses this term not necessarily for a good side or a bad side. It's actually just, it's a relationship of helping someone. For example, in the story of Moses, when he goes and helps a believer against the people of the Pharaoh, there was a person from the side of the Pharaoh who was fighting with this person. Moses goes and helps him, and the Quran uses this term Shia, meaning he was his helper. So this term actually has stuck due to historical reasons. The term Shia is not something that's really delegated by God as a title. The title that has been given to mankind for believers and worshippers of the truth in modern time, and always has been, the title has been completed by the name called Islam. And God says, Inna Deena indallahi al-Islam. The religion to God is al-Islam, meaning the submission, which the root word means also peace and submission and so on. So it's actually a proper noun. Al-Islam is a proper noun, which also denotes a verb, which is submission, and of course which denotes peace. The root word salama also is derived from the same root. The term Shia actually came later on in time due to the political events that took place, which kind of stuck within a community. The Messenger has used this term in many ways historically from all sides of the Islamic schools of thought, that the group of people who support any particular group are known as the Shia. So historically, for example, after the departure of the Messenger of God, as we understand, there was a dispute as to who should be the successor. Was there a successor appointed? Is there a successor? And if so, who is it? So basically divided into two groups. One group insisted that the Prophet did not appoint someone, and therefore he left it to the people to appoint. And that led to a caliphate that started under the Umayyad Empire, which then led to the Abbasid Empire, which is another empire that ruled for a long period of time. And those who were supporting the starters of these kinds of differences on both sides were known as Shia. So if you supported, for example, Muawiyah, they were known as the Shia of Muawiyah. And then those who were with Ali, they were known as the Shia of Ali. And as you know, Ali was the son-in-law and cousin of the Holy Prophet. But understand that this relationship, many of us in the modern times tend to think that when we talk about lineage and we talk about relationships and cousins and son-in-law, somehow something creeps into our heads with the thought of royalty. It's almost like saying, well, isn't that what royalty is all about, where a king, the prince inherits the king? Is this something like that? What are you talking about? In fact, it's not. From an Islamic point of view, inheritance due to lineage is not within the principles of God. Though God has used lineage to maintain a certain group of leaders among prophets and successors within a lineage, but it's not because of lineage that one inherits that. It's a decree of God. And even within lineage, the eldest son could still be denied authority and the youngest son could be given, and it's got nothing to do with the father appointing it, but rather it's a divine instruction from the Shi'i perspective. I, as a Muslim, first and foremost, don't like these terms, Shia, Sunni. I don't like these terms, personally. I think it creates a lot of unnecessary segregation from a political point of view, and it creates animosity, and I don't like it. I really think that we, as Muslims, should address ourselves as Muslims, and then if there is a need to be more granular and to describe the particular perspective that we take within Islam, one can say that I'm leaning towards this particular pathway, which may come under the category of Shia or Sunni, but as far as I'm concerned, that should be a secondary matter, not a primary matter. So the terminology we understand is just the term Shia. Historically, we understand, which is fascinating from either side, that successorship is essential and fundamental in Islam. Islam is composed of two major schools, the Sunni and the Shia, and both schools, which really form the entire Muslim population on earth pretty much today, you find that they all unanimously agree that successorship is fundamental to the continuity of the message of God. Okay. One school, which is the Sunni school, states that the Prophet did not appoint and left it to the people to choose. The other school says no, the Prophet cannot leave this world without appointing someone, and the Quran clearly stipulates that there is authority that is supposed to succeed, and that successorship, in its fundamental principles, must be appointed by a divine authority, either directly from God or from a prophet, and it cannot be given, that authority cannot be distributed among the people. Meaning you cannot do a shura where we have a council of gatherings and then we're going to decide who the next Khalifa is going to be. Now here the term Khalifa according to the Quran means a successor. Khalifa just means successorship, inheritor, one who inherits. God has said all of mankind is also Khalifa. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi Khalifa. I will place on earth an inheritor. Meaning you and I are also Khalifas, but in the fact that we have been created as human beings on earth and been given authority, in other words, authority to wander the earth and to use the resources of the earth for our benefit. God says you are its inheritors, and therefore there is a level of khilafah that we all possess, but this is not the khilafah we're talking about, because the Quran distinguishes these two types, one being the general and one being the specific, which in Arabic is known as am and khas. Meaning you have generalities and then you have specificities. Here we're discussing specificity. So the history basically has laid this reality that upon the Prophet's departure, these two schools started to form. Now, when we look at the Muslim community in the world today, which is about 1.8 billion on earth, that's 1.8 billion human beings out of 6.8 human beings, 6.8 billion human beings, that's a sizable amount. Within this community of 1.8 billion, approximately 80%, 75 to 80% is composed of the Sunni school, and 20 to 25% is composed of the Shia school. These are the two breakups as far as statistics are concerned, and the numbers and the demographics. And what happens is that if you examine both schools, you say, what are the commonalities of these two schools that can be considered for these two to come under one umbrella called Islam? How can we distinguish them and say that both these groups come within the prescriptions of Islam? So let me describe briefly what Islam is according to the Quran and what its regulations are, and then we can decide whether an individual falls under that category or not. God in the Quran clearly states that a believer is the one who believes in God, believes in the Day of Judgment, and does good deeds. That's the general. Then the specifics in the Quran describes that a believer is one who believes in God and the messengership of the Holy Prophet and all prophets preceding him, and that the messenger of God, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him and his family, is the last and the sealer of prophets. If you believe in that, then you have become a Muslim. And therefore, for you to accept Islam, you must bear witness to two things: that there is no God but one God, the absolute one God, who has no children, he does not beget, nor is he begotten. And second, that the messenger of God is the seal of prophets, meaning he's the last messenger, and after him there are no more messengers. Now if you examine both schools of thought, major schools, Sunni and Shia, you find both of them agree to this. That first and foremost, God is one, and secondly, that the messenger of God is the sealer of prophets. So within the prescription of Islam, we find that both schools are actually in conformity to this principle laid out in the Quran. The Quran also states that the book of God, which is the Quran, the Furqan, which is the deciding factor of the do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs, the moral principles of humanity, that it must be accepted as a divine scripture. Well, both schools once again agree that the Quran is an immutable, absolute word of God, and it is infallible in the sense that there's not a single mistake or error in it. There is no additional Quran, there is no other Quran floating around. These kinds of talks about certain groups having a different Quran, I will talk about it, these are attempts to create disunity and division through misinformation and disinformation, and I'd like to address them before I conclude this presentation this evening. So both schools come within this Islamic principle, the belief in God. If you look at Islam as a religion, it's a universal religion. It's the only religion that I know of that addresses by name Jews, Christians, Sabians, the people. It's the only religion in the world that I know of that addresses pretty much the vast majority of the human population within its principles. For example, in the Quran, Allah says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالنَّصَارَ وَالصَّابِينَ. Indeed, the believers, the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabians, مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ, provided you believe in God, وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ, and the day of judgment, وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, and you do good deeds, فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. For you there is a reward from your Lord. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, there is no fear upon you. وَلَهُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, and you should not worry. Meaning God is addressing the Christians, the Jews, everyone, that you are all within the mercy of God, within His domain, and you've all been given this opportunity to come towards the truth. All human beings, including atheists, are all struggling to come closer to the truth. And therefore the Islamic principle stipulates that the entire human race has been guided and has been given free will to exercise its ability to choose what it wants, and as long as it is cognitive living and able to make choices, it must retain its free will. And the way you would bring a person to the truth, meaning we're all moving in a direction towards greater truth, then what we need to do is we need to invite people to the truth through kind exhortation and wisdom. As the Quran says, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah." Invite people with wisdom and kind speech. Meaning, I cannot go and say, oh, he's a Sunni, or he is a Shia, or he's a Christian, or he's an atheist, and therefore I have a right now to punish this person, or to beat him, or to kick him, or to fight him, or to take his property away. The Quran forbids such attitude. So it's always fascinating to me, people who commit crimes, when they, bomb people and they kill people in the name of God. It's always fascinating to me. How in the name of God? Which God do you believe in? What kind of a God do you worship? A God who is so venomous that goes around and segregates His own creation and causes chaos and havoc among themselves by His command. That's an absurdity. And it's not even worth worshiping such a God, for you're better off not worshiping. And indeed, such a God does not exist. But there are people who take that authority in the name of God to commit their own whimsical attempts to try to rule other people in the name of God. So let's be very clear and categorical. I don't care if you're a Christian, a Jew, or an atheist, or a Muslim, a Sunni or a Shia. No one has the authority to go around and cause harm to any human being in the name of God. And therefore, in the name of God, you're not allowed to cause any harm. That means that if you are a worshiper in the name of God, you must be the most forgiving and the most kind and the most generous in the society. It's very essential. We must understand that. So in principle, when you look between the Sunni and the Shia schools of thought, we're very similar. The Kaaba, for example, which is the house of God, which was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. Abraham, the patriarch of the Abrahamic faiths. Imagine, he built that cube, which is known as the Kaaba. Kaaba actually means cube. Okay? And by the command of God. He is the father of Isaac, who is the father of Jacob, who is the father of Joseph. And these are great prophets who came, and they brought about principles of humanity that should be practiced in the worship of one God, and to have equity and to have justice, while we have diversity of opinions. So this is the principle that in Islam, the way I see it as a Muslim, that these are our distinctions. And as long as we're within those prescriptions, then we have to say, with gratitude, that the human race has maintained, in a miraculous fashion, as far as I'm concerned, that we have maintained a general principle of goodness within the principles of Islam, particularly, for example. Even Christians. If you look at Christians today, what do Christians typically do? They promote good. They are the promoters of the love of God. They're the promoters of goodness, right? Jesus says what in the Bible? He says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye when there's a log in yours? Okay, that's a good principle. Meaning, don't go pointing fingers at others. Look at yourself. Jesus says, when someone abuses you, turn the other cheek. Be forgiving. Okay, that's a promotion of goodness. Such promotions are what gives credence to such religions to exist for long terms. And we as believers and as human beings who are brothers in believers, among believers, meaning we are brothers in humanity, or we are brothers among believers. The basic principles of the promotion of good and the forbiddance of evil should be our driving force. So getting back to the same idea of Shia versus Sunni, as one would say Shia versus Sunni, in principle really, even the Kaaba is at its center, the 5 daily prayers is at its center, the Quran is at its center, the Holy Prophet is at the center, God is at the absolute center. and the belief in the Day of Judgment is at the center. There is really very minimal difference here. If I extend this between Sunni and Shia to a further out of Islam, you'll find even among Christians and Jews that the majority of it, of both these three schools, are really the majority overlaps. It's the minority that does not overlap. The majority overlaps. It means we have commonalities that are a majority, and it's a minority that's not a commonality. So we as a human race should consider this and understand that we have to see this diversity from a broad spectrum, and then we can understand why our differences exist. Having said that, today from a geopolitical stand, you find that there's so much misinformation going around, which leads to tunnel visions, which leads to destruction, which I think is a poison that consistently gets fed within the communities that needs to be eradicated, or at least we need to be immunized from such poisons. Okay? It's a blessing that we have organizations like Thaqalain Muslim Association, for example. Now here Thaqalain Muslim Association says, oh, it's a Shia promoter. It's a group that promotes Shiism. And versus the MSA. No, as far as I'm concerned, they're both Muslim organizations. And they have a right to express their positions. And if there were 10 other Muslim organizations, TMA, SMA, whatever, however many acronyms you want to put it together. It's fine. As long as you substantiate your positions, and you have a right to substantiate, which is what we love in a very diverse community, where everyone's given a means to express their positions. The sad thing is when we dislike people on the other side. And we have what we call intolerance for people on the other side. That's the sadness, which in my position is you cannot be a promoter of good when you harbor hatred or animosity, or you misinform or purposefully disinform in order to create chaos and havoc, or in order to maintain your own side by belittling the other side. I think there's a weakness to that, there's a sickness to that, which we don't realize it leads to a lot of destruction. For example, you know that there are many people who think, as atheists for example, that the believers in God condemn the atheists to hell. Often atheists will have arguments, says, oh, so you believers think that we are going to go to hell, aren't we? We're all going to burn in hell. In fact, the Pew research that was done recently, more than 70% of believers in God do not consider atheists to be condemned to hell. But look at how the media presents it. That when you're a believer in God, it means now you're going to condemn an atheist. And therefore the atheist feels attacked. And then they see people of religion, they're constantly passing judgment. When in fact, the vast majority of believers in God do not pass such judgments. So we must understand that, so that we have a better understanding of each other, and that our diversity is better managed. Okay? Now, what is the misinformation? For example, you will see that Shia faith, the name Shia, in modern, especially in the Western world, is presented in a very fascinating way. There is a senator recently, a couple of years ago, who lost the bid to the Senate, Senator Santorum, for example, presented a 1-hour presentation at University of Oklahoma describing who the Shias are. And I was very amused by his political spin in trying to describe who the Shias are. And it's very interesting today, because Iran, which is a Persian nation, which is predominantly Shia, which is seen as not abiding by the American policies, and therefore they've become not our allies. Suddenly it's very interesting that now there is this quagmire. You see, you've got Saudi Arabia, who's really your ally. It's predominantly seen as a Sunni school. And then you've got this Shia school. You see this group called Iran. And now it gets melted down into this geopolitical world. And I'm listening to the senator describing how Shiism started. And it amuses me because, you know, when you become a leader and you become a senator, you would expect at least you do a little bit of your homework before you speak about other people's religions. But here's how he's introducing it. He says Shiism started by the Persians. Because the Persians have had royalty for thousands of years. So upon the Prophet's death, immediately they sort of infiltrated Islam, and they made it into a Persian thing, and they insisted that the son-in-law and the cousin of the Prophet, since he was the closest blood relative of the Prophet, he should be the caliph. The Persians were defeated in the second caliph's period. The Persians were a nemesis within the empires to the Romans, and they were not even defeated in the Prophet's time. And upon the Prophet's departure, the Persians were still in power. In the second caliph's time, the Persians were defeated. And even then it was way established. The caliphate had already been established in principle by that movement. So this idea of spinning these wrong ideas, and then it picks up on CNN, and then it picks up on Fox networks, and they say, oh, the Shias are the Persians. So suddenly the minute this attempt to associate names in a certain political way so that we can spin ideas, so that we can make the public have a certain instantaneous position that will support our political agendas. And I think that's very, very reckless in public life. For any leader to do that, I don't care if it's a Muslim, Shia versus Sunni, Christian, you talk about Catholics versus Protestants, I don't care. If you start igniting divisions at this level, and then a life gets taken as a result of that foolishness, then we are held responsible for such foolish attitudes. So it's interesting that I see that a person who tries to equate the start of Shiism with some Persian movement in a university, in an academic environment, by a man who has been leading a state in a constituency that has been legislating rules within a country. And I'm shocked. I said, wow, we've got a lot of work to do. This is a real problem. Okay? In the name of God, and I make this as a general statement, in the name of God, it is not proper for any group, I don't care even if I'm a Muslim or a Shia, for me to put down another religion in a belligerent way, where I'm going to now excite and ignite people's attitudes against the other side. This is not within the prescriptions of God. Sadly, I say this because I see it all over the place. And I say to myself, I said, it's interesting. What happened to academics? What happens to the Quran which says, قُلْ هَاتُ بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ? Tell them to bring their proof if they're truthful. Let them put it on the table. Let's be scientific about it. Look how we honor the scientists of the world. We were just listening to a scientist speaking about the brain and how the brain works and the neurons work with the chips and so on. We said, wow. Well, why is that wow? Because they followed protocol. They have a protocol. Now, I don't care if that guy is an Indian, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew. He's following protocol, and I respect protocol. So if that was an atheist talking, I'd say no problem. It's science being exposed to me, and that's protocol, and I like it. I'm being exposed to the truth, though it comes from an atheist. Right? So what of this? We find that our ideas are not protocol-based, they're more emotionally based, and then we are trying to protect our own agendas. I always feel an individual who tries to belittle the other side without merit has a weakness inherent in their side. That is why they need to belittle the other side. Otherwise, why would you do it? If there is total strength in you, if you're a truthful man, you don't have to go and create trouble among people. You just have to be truthful. It's the trouble that's going to come after you. You're not going to go for trouble. No one's going to come and hit you. I mean, you're not going to go hit people. People are going to come and hit you because you're speaking the truth. A truthful person in any society will never create trouble. Even there's a guy who's pugnacious in nature, who likes to cause fights among people, and he's a troublemaker and always looking for things to create a fight for. You find the good person will always find ways to evade that, to avoid such confrontations. It's the troublemaker who will find every way to corner you, and to kill you, and to put trouble on you, and to burden you, and burden your family, and to destroy you. But a worshipper in God, who knows the other side is definitely wrong. In fact, the other side is actually preaching venomous ideas. Even then, a believer in God does not embark on moving towards that enemy by hitting them, or by writing false ideas about the other side. It's impossible. It doesn't make sense to me. So when I go on the web and I see wonderful sites that have so much information, then they have this link, groups, Shia, beware of Shias. What is this now? I said, wow, look at this site. So much work has been done. It's so beautiful, the amount of work that has been done to educate the community about the principles of Islam. And then suddenly this little poison pill has to be sitting there. And you press on it. I said, well, if I was on that side, would I be doing such a thing? Do I have to warn you? Hasn't your mind been taught the wrong and right? And at what level should I warn you? Yeah, if that group goes around killing people, it's creating all types of clandestine movements that are very dangerous to the growth of the community. Yes, warn the people. Oh, watch out for the Christians. You know, you need to be aware of them. Watch out for the Jews. What nonsense. If you're going to bring such ideas forward, bring it at an academic level. Even then, don't make judgments and say, this is the Christian philosophy, this is the Muslim philosophy, these are our differences, you decide what you think is wrong and you decide what you think is right. I think that's more proper than for someone to write a website, for example, where you're bashing a group of people, and then it kind of lingers in the tongues of people. And the person says, so which school of thought do you follow? I'm a Shia. Oh, excuse me. They run. Why? Oh, because you're somehow contaminated, and I can't get near you. And don't even talk to them. They're dangerous because they're constantly hiding things under there, and they're using taqiyya. You know, they're always hiding. They've always got this secretive society. Any community that tells me this, I said, you've got something that you're hiding. Why do you say that? Why don't you put it on the table? Why don't you say it the way it should be? I'm not afraid. Look, as a Muslim, many a times when I've had my debates with atheists, people say, you're going to debate atheists? You know, those guys are pretty tricky and slick. I said, fine. If they can win the argument, more power to them. Then I need to improve myself. Then what I believe in is weak. And if it cannot sustain scrutiny, then I better change. I'm a fool to think that I'm living in the truth when I'm so afraid of being interrogated at the level of my spirituality. Many of us, by the way, have fear of being questioned because we are very comfortable with the little things that we've caught up with, and it's mixed with the cultures, and we feel very comfortable. And don't get me into this because I'm going to become confused. Fine, you don't have to. But what if it does? What's going to happen to you? So let us be broad-minded and open, and look at the reality of what the world is all about, and to say that this kind of information, misinformation, is very, how would I say, it's very regressive in nature. And this was not the principles of the Prophet. For example, in the history of the Prophet's life, you find people used to call him magician. They called him a madman. But his character didn't change. As much as negative information was being spread against him, he was consistent. And when people saw him in the flesh, they were so impressed by his presence that they said, if you are the madman, then I want to follow this person. Because I have never seen a better person like this. Historically, during his period of time, he used to melt hearts. That was the way, the quality of all prophets were. Even when Jesus walked this, even when Moses walked this, Abraham, these people touched lives in a positive way. They didn't go around and saying, that person you should hate, and this group you should avoid, and that person is an enemy. The Prophet wasn't like that. Even when he made treaties with the Jews who didn't like him, even then he treated them well. All this information out there that the Prophet was very quote-unquote Semitic. By the way, this always interests me, anti-Semitic. Semite is an Arab too, you know that. Okay, the Arabs who come from the region are known as Semites. So this anti-Semitism just doesn't make sense to me. If an Arab is an anti-Semite, then he's against his own self. It doesn't make sense to me. But somehow these names have been categorized for certain groups with certain ideas. But in my opinion, anti-anything has to be very carefully measured. And anti-what? Okay, anti-evil, yes, it's good. To be anti-murder, anti-destruction, very good. Progressiveness is very essential. So what we find is that the Messenger of God even did not have such attitudes, and we have to be very broad-minded in understanding that these two schools of thought are here to stay. And the diversity is here to stay. But I think it is prudent on our part, regardless of what school of thought we belong to. If you're a Shia, we must look at the Sunnis and the Christians and the Jews and everyone around us with dignity. And we must validate academically their positions and to say, that person believes in that. If I were born a Christian in that family, what would be the probability that I'd be a Muslim today? Low, if I'm a Muslim. What would be the probability that I'd be following the same school of thought? Very high. Well, in that case, then I must respect that. For the human race follows what their families have given. And our objective as a human race is to share our differences in order to bring people towards humanity. So what we find is that in principle, and I'm going to conclude right now, that you find that this school of thought known as the Shia is very marginalized. I know. Because as a follower of Ahlul Bayt, I consider myself, I am of course a Shia, and I don't have anything to hide on that, but I don't like to perpetuate that idea because it doesn't really serve the purpose unless it's done at an academic level. Someone says, okay, you're a Muslim, now what's your persuasion? You know, how do you pray? Who do you follow? Who do you follow after the Prophet? I said, I follow Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why? Oh, because I believe God commanded him to be the successor. No humans can choose that. The Holy Prophet clearly appointed him, not only at the end of his mission, but in the beginning of his mission. In fact, the Quran clearly commanded the Prophet to warn his near ones first. وَانْذُرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Warn your near ones first. That's the principle of the Quran. You find in the Quran, prophets took over control. I mean, they inherited other prophets. They were inherited by other prophets. The Quran mentions that unanimously. You find Solomon inherited David. You find Joseph inherited Jacob. You find all these great prophets all inherited. Aaron was the brother of Moses. They were both prophets in the Quran. Even in the biblical terms, they were prophets of God. So what you find is, it's within a family. And they've been chosen as a family branch. Abraham, being the patriarch of the Abrahamic faiths, is nothing new to us all. It's within a family. So it's not royalty per se, it's divinely ordained within a family. And therefore, from that position, you find that God had to have appointed succession to Muhammad, says that it was expedient, it was extremely essential that a leader be established upon the Prophet's departure, because Islam was nascent in its stages, meaning it was just being established. Many people who were pagans, who were idol worshippers, had just become Muslims, and their faith was very weak. They were really at a crossroads. They weren't really completely committed to Islam, and therefore it was very shaky, and a leader was essential in order to guide it. Every nation needs a good leader. We know even during times of war, for example, even in the United States, no president has ever lost an election in the period if elections took place during a war. Why? Because its citizens always consider that maintaining the same leader is a sign of authority, which maintains stasis within a period of war. Meaning the enemy should not see you weakening by you changing leadership. So imagine, upon the Prophet's departure, it's extremely essential that a leader be established. And therefore a leader was established by the command of God. And it was clearly stipulated in the Quran and in the Hadith. And we know that the Messenger of God, before his death, clearly appointed Ali ibn Abi Talib before his death. And the Hadith of this particular event, known as the Hadith of Ghadir, which is happening now in the month of the Hajj, which is this period when the Messenger of God appointed his successor, was so prevalent, it is known as mutawatir. Mutawatir in Arabic means it's the kind of statement of the Prophet that is unanimously accepted across the entire Muslim world, including the non-Muslim world. Because that event was so prevalent, was so conspicuously done, that there is really nothing to wonder about. Now you may ask, well then if that's the case, well, how come we have 80%, 75% Sunni? How come we have such blurry areas about this? We have a division. Understand the geopolitical situation of how things evolve. When a community of people take authority and leadership, what happens is its people tend to follow the ways of the leader. The Umayyad Empire established itself as de facto authority. And therefore the name Shia remained only for Ali. Although in the time of Muawiyah, for example, okay, who was the first caliph of the Umayyad Empire, you find that they were known as the Shia of Muawiyah and the Shia of Ali. But because Muawiyah became de facto authority, you find the name Shia on that side fell, and what remained was the Shia of Ali. And today the Shias are known because of that. Otherwise, this name even would not have existed. And remember, names only exist because there's a contrarian point of view. If you were the only human being on earth, probably you would not have a name. But as soon as there's a second human being, now you have to identify yourself. Such identification becomes an inherent characteristic of exposing your quality versus another person. That's the only reason. So we're not here to cause names and to break them into various names in order to cause division, but there's a natural phenomenon of having names in various sizes. Even Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah evolved much later in time. It wasn't in the time of Muawiyah, although Muawiyah had a system of Sunnah, but that name did not solidify until later on in time. So what we find is that because the Umayyad Empire became the de facto empire, which ruled for almost 90 years, which was then taken over by the Abbasid Empire, which was once again ruling for a long period of time, they all proclaimed and maintained the caliphate according to this Sunni school of thought, and therefore it became prevalent in that community that more people would follow that. Now if you look at the world today, demographics, and I'll conclude on this, if you look at the Middle East, the Shia and Sunni population is very close to almost 50-50, maybe 60-40, Sunni Shia, in the Middle East. When you go further out of the Middle East, you find the ratios change drastically. Indonesia, if you go to any areas outside of the Middle East, you'll find that the vast majority tend to be Sunni. Why is that? But what happens is they tend to follow whoever is in command at the central authority, and therefore they tend to follow. You examine today in the Christian world, you find the majority of the people among Christians are Catholics. Why? Because the Catholics ruled for the longest period of time, and therefore they are a majority. The Protestant faith started later on in time. The United States, for example, has more Protestants, but still Catholics are a majority on earth. Why are they majority? If you ask a Protestant, they'll tell you historically this is because they ruled for the longest period of time, and therefore people followed that particular school and particular ideology. So in conclusion, it doesn't make one school right over the other because of majority versus minority. We're not here to debate the majority issue, but we're here to understand the demographics of why these two schools of thought exist and what do they actually imply. I hope I've made some headway into this and hopefully do justice to the subject. This is a very broad subject, obviously, which requires a lot of discussion, but nonetheless, I think it's important for us to understand that we have to, from whichever school of thought we belong to, we must have, and I'm concluding on this, we must have a broad vision to understand and respect diversity. I always say this, and I'll conclude on this: God is the one who created us all. He has authority over the entire universe. He owns the universe. And many a times you and I think, I need to go and do God's work and make everyone follow my way. Everyone should follow my way because I want to do God's work. Because God told me, make everyone follow the truth according to what you think. And I always smile about that. I said, God could have done it himself. And even you and I going around cannot make everyone to follow our way. Then what is the real mission behind it? Diversity is here to stay. And you and I better accept it and understand that difference of opinion, even among identical twins, is never the same for everything. And that's here to stay. So let's learn to agree to disagree agreeably. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. We understand, the question is, how do we know that he was not selected based on being the closest family? The Quran has a principle. Allah says, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ إِنَّهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. Who can intercede on behalf of God except by his permission? One. Number two, when you read the Quranic verses, from all points of view as far as leadership is concerned, it's very clear that it has to be appointed, though he is the closest blood relative. Let me give you an example and hopefully I'll drive this home. Moses, as a prophet, Musa, alayhi salam, when he was born in a very difficult period, because you will find that the Pharaoh was killing the firstborn because he knew through the soothsayers that there will be a firstborn who will come and destroy him. And the Pharaoh, in his arrogant attitude, said, I will stop that. So he started killing the firstborn. And it happened that Moses was one of the firstborn. So God says, I will protect Moses, he said to his mother, and said, take this little child of yours, put him in a basket, and leave him in the Nile River, and I will guide it. And it was guided to the house of the Pharaoh, and as you know, the Pharaoh ends up raising him. So this is a great chosen being. We're not talking about an ordinary person here. We're talking about an incredibly great person. Not like somebody, many years later suddenly had a vision in God, and then suddenly God says, okay, come on, you're my representative. No. From birth, God has chosen him. To the point where that basket could have so many potential movements, yet God drives it to the banks of the house of the Pharaoh. And the wife of the Pharaoh sees it and takes it in as her own. This is the same Pharaoh who wanted to kill everyone, correct? All the firstborn. This is Moses who's born under his own house. This Moses now has grown older and has now reached maturity, and God is talking to him now on the mountain and says, Moses, Musa, idhab ila Fir'aun, innahu tagha. Go to Fir'aun, go to the Pharaoh. He has exceeded the bounds. So God has commanded Moses to do the job. The command is on. Yet even then Moses realized that for me to go to the Pharaoh, I need help. I need a supporter. You see? Now you would think logically that a prophet who's been chosen from birth, who God spoke to directly, who is so revered by God that he's protected, given all kinds of miracles, it's a no-brainer that this guy is 100% in the good on the good side of God. Does he now say, okay, Aaron, you're my brother, come on, let's go. We're going to go out to Pharaoh, and we're going to tell him that he's on the wrong side, and let's bring him to the right path. No. Moses in the Quran says, وَاجْعَلْنِي وَزِيرًا مِنْ أَهْلِ هَارُونَ أَخِي. Make my brother my supporter. Look, Moses is the prophet of God. Even then, he can't appoint. Even then, he doesn't appoint. He's a prophet of God. He doesn't appoint. He says to God, make my brother Aaron, who's a prophet also, make him my helper, and let us the two go. And God accepts it. So what is the principle in the Quran? That though Moses and Aaron are brothers, even then, they're from the same mother. Even then, you find Quran states, this is a prophet. This is a great prophet. Look, even he doesn't appoint without my command. So then what of successorship? We need to think that way, and we'll understand how important authority from God is from these points. Why do the Shia have a negative connotation towards Abu Bakr Siddiq and Aisha when they were the Prophet's close companions? Wouldn't Rasulullah know better than us? Very good question, excellent question. Having a negative connotation has to have validity. If it is not substantive, in other words, for me to dislike somebody on the opposite side because they happen to follow someone I don't like, there is no authority for such an individual to have such hatred. To have negative connotation here, okay, to exercise this negativity has to be highly conditional. Let me give you an example. We're talking about Abu Bakr, who was the first caliph, meaning he took the caliphate when in fact from the Shia point of view, Ali should have been the successor, right? So now you have a dispute. So let me give you an example of how the very man whose authority God gave was taken from him. What did he say? And how did he behave? And this is really a lesson that we all need to learn. Whether we're Sunni or Shia, we need to learn this lesson from this angle. You find that there was a man from the children of Israel, Bani Israel, who came to him and said, look, your prophet just died and you guys are already disputing about who's the successor. Basically trying to get him excited. And Imam Ali, who is now the authority of God from a divine prescription, he is the authority of God, says to him that we Muslims are united. We believe in one God. We worship, our prayers are intact. Our Quran is intact. Our belief in the oneness of God is intact. Leave us alone. He doesn't go around and say, no, you're right, let's get together and let's fight it out and let's hash it. What does Imam say? That although the caliphate has been taken, our objective as Muslims is to protect the principles of Islam. The difference of opinion, we can talk about it. It is very clear that Abu Bakr was definitely a companion of the Prophet, but Sahaba understand one thing. Within the principles of Islam, and this is something very important for us all to understand, that just because somebody inherits the title Sahaba, it doesn't necessarily make him right or wrong. So if I say, for example, he was a Sahaba of the Prophet, it doesn't mean anything. Sahaba in Arabic, Sahaba in Arabic means a person who is in close proximity to you, the one who's living by you, the one who met you, the one who sat next to you. For example, you find Joseph, a great prophet in the Quran, is imprisoned. He is now with two prisoners with him. Both these prisoners were disbelievers. They did not worship God. Both of them. Yet you find Joseph addresses them as Ya Sahib as-Sijn. Oh, my companions in prison. He doesn't say, he calls them Sahib as-Sijn. Sahaba here in the Quran means my companions. You find in the Quran, God mentions people who will enter hell. Ulaika ashabun nar. They are the companions of hell. Okay, again Sahaba, the word is used. Ulaika ashabul jannah. They are companions of paradise. You notice the Quran is ambivalent. Okay, it doesn't take a position as far as what Sahaba means. So we have to be careful that just because history is told us Sahaba, it doesn't make all the Sahaba right. We know that there were good Sahaba and then there were bad Sahaba. I'm not passing a judgment as to who's a good Sahaba and who's a bad Sahaba. That's a discussion of a different kind. But my point I want to make clear is sometimes we take blanket statements and think once it comes under that it's carved in stone and it has to be. And I'm saying no, it cannot be. The principles of the Quran clearly state just because somebody is a companion, it doesn't mean it makes them special. Okay, unless God mentioned the specialty, then there is specialty. Ammar ibn Yasir was special. The Prophet said, Ammar ibn Yasir is so chosen by God that he will enter paradise with his parents. You find Abu Dhar, who was a companion of the Prophet. The Prophet said, there's no man more truthful under the sky than Abu Dhar. Okay, if the Prophet said that, yeah. Now people might say, well, what about Abu Bakr? The Prophet has stated. That's a discussion in itself. But as a Muslim community, if a particular school of thought believes in the caliphate of such people, we have to be prudent on either side, not to step on other people's emotions and to say, oh, I don't like that guy, and we start making fun of such people. This is not within Islam. If the very man whose khilafah was taken did not do such things, and even when he mentioned it at an academic level, that this is the command of God. If the caliphate is so important, well, what was the rule of the caliphate? How did you guys become the caliphs? Imam Ali asks Abu Bakr, how did you become a caliph? He says, I'm the closest blood relative. In the Saqifa Sahaba of Banu Sayda, he said, I'm the closest blood relative of the Prophet. And I am of the Quraysh. Imam says, I'm closer. And I'm not only Quraysh, I'm Banu Hashim within Quraysh. And the Prophet chose me. So these are the academic discussions. But for me to pass judgment and hatred and condemnation, for example, say, oh, he's going to go to hell. So those caliphs are going to go to hell. I said, who told you this? There is a beautiful story of the Holy Prophet burying a human being, one of the followers, one of his own Sahaba. Here's a Sahaba once again. After he's buried, his mother or his wife started making comments, oh, I can see him in paradise. So the Prophet says, how do you know that? He says, well, Prophet, you're a prophet of God. You buried him. You prayed for him. You stood in front of his grave. He has to go to paradise. The Prophet says, no, you can't say that. Did God tell you that? Who told you this? Are you the master of the day of judgment? Or is God the master of the day of judgment? Who allowed you to pass such a judgment? That's a beautiful story, because now I can see a Christian, I can see a Sunni, I can see a Shia, I can see an atheist. Can I say this person's going to go to hell? God says, who are you to pass a judgment? You don't know where you are going. How did you know where this guy's going? Who told you this? Did someone tell you this? Did it come from God? Did it say in the Quran that you're going to go to hell or heaven? Okay, Abu Lahab is going to go to hell because the Quran says it. His wife is going to go to hell because the Quran said it. You want to say it? Say it. But if God didn't say it, who are you? So people who make judgments against the caliphs and pass, categorical judgments that such a person is going to burn, that's your comment. And such venomous comments should remain within your own tongue. And in my best of advice is, get rid of it. Because that's not what God has created us for. Allah did not create us to go around condemning and creating venomous attacks against people because of that. Those who follow the caliphs, in my opinion, have a good intention of following. In their minds, they really think that these people are truly designated in their ways. It's an academic discussion to understand who should be an authority and who should not be. But it's not upon me to pass a judgment just because you consider that to be a good leader as far as you're concerned. I respect that. And we should respect that. It's not within our jurisdiction to pass such judgments. Now, you want to have an academic discussion? We can have it and say, is it possible that the caliphs can be chosen by people? Is it possible that within a small group of people they can choose? Is it possible that a person who has not been appointed by God can take such a position? This we can talk about. Even from the very mouth of these leaders themselves, they say, we can't rule. Even Umar ibn Khattab said, "Lawla Ali la halaka Umar." Had it not been for Ali, Umar would have been destroyed. This is Umar's own statement, which is authentic in all the writings. So Umar himself admitted that if not for Ali ibn Abi Talib, it is very common. Umar used to always consult Imam Ali alayhi salam on various complicated issues. Various complicated issues. Let's talk at that level. And not pass judgment and hatred for each other. What we need to do, even Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who is one of the leaders of the four schools of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, says that your love for Ahl al-Bayt is essential. It's fundamental. And if you do not promote that love, you are not a Muslim. Now, where did he get that from? It's in the Quran. It's in the Hadith. Okay, then we are all the same. In principle, we are the same. That Sunni and Shia both are being promoted by God to go towards the commands of God and His Prophet. And what did the Prophet say? He says, you must get close to my near ones, period. As far as the wife of the Prophet, historically the Prophet had many wives. He had 9 to 11 wives, right? More than that. How come the other wives are not being mentioned? Why is only Aisha being mentioned all the time? With due respect to her, why is she the only one mentioned? Did the other wives, they're not good? And people say, look, they were Ummul Mu'mineen. I said, they were all Ummul Mu'mineen. They were all mothers of the believers. By the way, why they call Ummul Mu'mineen? People think, oh, she's the mother, meaning she's got great authority. No. In Surah Al-Ahzab, God says, وَأَزْوَاجُ أُمَّهَاتُهُمْ The wives are like their mothers, implying you cannot marry them. Once they're married to the Prophet, forbidden for any human being to marry them after that. That's why they become like your mothers. The next verse in the Quran, in the same Surah Ahzab, the 33rd chapter, God says the right of the child from the womb supersedes all. And if we were to consider the wives of the Prophet to be our mothers, then the Prophet should be our father. It's logical, it's rational. Yet the Quran says, مَا كَانَ مُحَمَّدٍ أَبَا أَحَدٍ مِّن رِجَالِكُمْ. The Prophet is not your father. وَلَكِنْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. Rather, he is the messenger of God. So that means that if the wives were to be our mothers, then the messenger should be our fathers. God teaches us in a logical fashion that don't think that because we call the wives of the Prophet mothers of the believers, it means they are your mothers. It just means you cannot marry them. Now, do they inherit immunity? Do they have instantaneous immunity because they married the Prophet? Well, let's go to the Quran. The Quran in Surah Al-Tahrim, the prohibition, you find God clearly shows two great prophets, both their wives entered hell. Will enter hell on Judgment Day. Now, am I making a judgment of this wife? No, not at all. But let us understand the principles that there are good wives, bad wives, medium wives. We all have them. And that's the principle within Islam. No one's passing a judgment as to which wife is going to go to heaven, which wife is going to go to hell. The point is, let us not try to take immunity by saying, because she's the wife of the Prophet, or any of them are wives of the Prophet, including Khadija, that suddenly now they get natural immunity. The Prophet said very clearly, Khadija and I will be in paradise together. The Messenger of God stated this unanimously. Every school of thought agrees that. Now, were the other wives bad or good? I'm not here to pass judgment. What we're here to understand is, this is the principle from the Quran, that even though you're a wife of the Prophet, that doesn't give you natural immunity. For you find ضرب الله مثلا للذين كفروا امرأة نوح وامرأة لوط كانت تحت عبدين من عبادنا صالحين فخانتاهما. An example of two servants of God who had two wives. وَقِيلَ ادْخُلَ النَّارَ مَعَ الدَّاخِلِ. And on Judgment Day, because they disobeyed the prophets, because they were so difficult, God says, and they will be told to enter hell. What happens to the rest of the wives? Only Allah knows. Our obligation is to search the truth and find the best balance and to respect them. Imam Ali alayhi salam, after he defeated Aisha in the battle of the camel, he respected her. He did not belittle her. He respected her. He didn't even enter the tent where she was. He sent her own brother, Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr, okay, who went in. Why? Because it was the honor to be given to the wife of the Prophet. When she was taken back to Medina, Imam Ali brought her back with dignity, took her to her house with dignity, though he defeated her in the battle of the camel in Basra. Even then you find Imam Ali respected her. That's the principle we should follow. Anybody want to ask a question? There's a lot of written questions here. You say that Islam was nascent in the 7th century. Isn't there a belief among Muslims that even Adam was a Muslim? Clearly, all prophets of God were Muslims. Quran states that Adam was the first Muslim on earth as a human being, and all prophets were Muslims. Hanifan Musliman. There was no such thing as Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. These all were given names in their own various ways. As far as Islam is concerned, all prophets were Muslims. So Islam is not a new religion that just got completed 14 centuries ago, or in the 7th century. That's not true. Islam got completed as a law of God 14 centuries ago. But when did the law start? When Adam was created. So the laws of God on earth for mankind started with Adam, and therefore Adam was the first prophet, was the first Muslim on earth, and they were all Muslims. Muslims means what? They were submissive, and they promoted oneness of God. Even if Jesus says himself, right? Why callest thou me good? There is none good but that which sent me. If you read in the Testament, you find one of the most powerful statements that was made in the entire Bible. Ask any Christian, any theologian will tell you, hear ye Israel, your Lord is one. This is a famous statement in the Bible. Hear ye Israel, understand, your Lord is one. Well, that's the principle of all prophets. Every prophet came to speak about one God. Unity in one God. One absolute God. And that's the principle. Anybody had? Yes.
If Muhammad was the last prophet, why was his successor needed? Like, no one else was going to speak the word of God, so why did they need a successor?
Excellent question. Thank you for asking. Prophethood and imamat, or successorship, which is known in authority, has two different functions. Prophets are role models and they're lawgivers. So the main fundamental principle of prophets in Islam, I know in the Judeo-Christian idea, prophets have other duties also, which Islamic prophets too, by the way. We are the same prophets, by the way. We shared the same prophets. But their obligation was to bring the law. When Jesus, for example, was born, one of the miracles in the Quran, Jesus did not declare his authority according to the biblical version. He was in his 30s. According to Islam, he declared his prophethood as upon birth. As soon as he was born, he says, قَالَ إِنِّي عَبْدُ اللَّهِ. He said, I am a servant of God. آتَانِي الْكِتَابِ. I have been given the book. وَجَعَلَنِي نَبِيًّا. And I have been made a prophet. وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُ. And I bring good news wherever I am. I am blessed wherever I go. وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا. I've been made blessed wherever I go. And I've been made kind to my mother. وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي. I've been made kind to my mother. You find all prophets came to deliver the law. So here Jesus himself says, I've been given the law. Which is the law? What we call the Injil, which in modern terms is called the Bible. You find Moses was given the Torah. You see? Abraham was also given a scripture. Okay? You find that certain prophets were given scriptures, others were not given scriptures. So in Islam, 124,000 prophets were sent on earth, and every continent on earth had a prophet of someone. Because the Quran states every community has been guided. So that's the guidance factor. When the religion of God gets completed, now it requires explanation for its practice. For there will always be a problem with explanation and misinterpretation or reinterpretations, and therefore you need a divine entity to ensure that such interpretations are not misconstrued. Because if you look at the history of the Prophet, he declared his prophethood at the age of 40. So for 40 years he was silent, though his actions were prophetic. Meaning the Prophet never lied. In fact, the first thing the Prophet used when he declared his prophethood was he stood on the mountain and he said, if I tell you there's a caravan behind this mountain, will you believe me? And he said, yes. The very pagans of Mecca said, you are an honest, truthful man, you've never lied. He says, then I bear witness there is no God and I am his messenger. So that was his message. When the message got completed, how long did it take for him to deliver the message in public life? 23 years. Of the 23 years, 13 years he was under subjection by the Meccans. Okay, he was oppressed. He was not given an opportunity to preach. Then when he migrated to Medina, he had 10 more years before his death. Within those 10 years, 8 years he was being attacked by various groups, by the Meccans. They constantly sent armies to attack him, to destroy him. And he kept defending. So 8 years. He's left with really 2 years of real peace. You cannot explain the gravity of the law that started from Adam, which now is the compendium of the entire law, combined the Torah, the Injil, all the scriptures in one book. And now to explain it to the people requires a much more long-term effort, which is where successorship comes into play. So the Prophet is saying that I will suffer in delivering the message, and the Imams, and Ali, for example, will suffer in explaining the message. But the Imams, the successors, are not allowed to bring new law. They can only reflect the law of the Prophet. If you look at the entire Najul Balagha, for example, the sermons of Ali ibn Abi Talib, not a word does he say, I say. He always says, the Prophet says. And this is what the Prophet wanted. And this is how you should do it. No Imam could ever bring a new law. Or, for that matter, abrogate a law. Impossible. They're not allowed to do that. If they did that, they would be blocking prophethood's completion. And now they'd be taking the position of prophethood. And they do not possess prophethood in them. They're just protectors. Meaning reflectors of the message. And that's really the authority of Imamah. I hope I've made it clear.
Yeah,
thank you. Okay. Where would the senator get false information about Shia practices starting with Persian? Who knows? Maybe he was on the street talking to some extremists and said, hey, let's talk about the Shia. I don't know. And besides, it suits the political front. You know, it's the Persian thing. It's the other thing. And that's the group that's very dangerous in the world today. So we have to watch out for them. Okay, you start this movement. And then the next thing you know, a poor innocent guy gets killed because his name starts with an S. You know, and it's like 9/11, right? After 9/11, what did they say? Oh, yeah, you know, these Muslims, they're the ones who wear the white turbans. Okay, a poor guy in one of the mid-states, you know, is a Sikh. He's not even a Muslim. The poor guy wears a turban because that's his religion. His religion tells him to wear a turban. Some guy from far shoots him, kills him. The poor guy wasn't even a Muslim. That's how dangerous misinformation, disinformation is. You find wars, battles, killings take place because people are ignorant of each other. And I always give this example, and we must think about this carefully, because we need to be prudent as human beings on this earth, and especially as believers on this earth. You know, you and I could be sitting, and I've given this example recently. I spoke at University of Oklahoma, and you can see this, you know, the community is beautiful, wonderful people. I don't care if you're white, you're black, you're Christian, I don't care. It's a beautiful community that we live in. This world is a wonderful community. That's critical for us. Look at this example. Imagine we're sitting in New York City train, right? The train is composed of a cosmopolitan community. Literally. There's a black person, a white person, rich person, poor person, clean person, dirty person, Muslim, Christian, Jew, atheist. Everything you can imagine is in one train. And everybody's looking at each other. Don't look at each other, right? You're not supposed to look at each other. What you're looking at, right? People say, okay, so don't look. So I'm a stranger, you're a stranger. Don't even get near me. And then suddenly the train gets into a crash. Now you're all stuck. Now you need to figure out a way to get out. Suddenly, all these segregations fall apart. We become brothers. Let's, come on, you help me. Yeah, come on, you give me your hand. What happened? That's a black guy. That's a white guy. That's a Muslim. What's happened? Please, these are not important. We're human beings. We need to get out of this train right now. We're suffocating. Oh, really? You were able to give up your faith in God? And your skin color too? Remember the difference between black and whites? Huh? You're not supposed to touch them. No, stupid idea of humankind that we suddenly start to segregate because of various hues of colors, and your school of thought is slightly different from mine, so you know what? You're just my enemy. God said, look at this same creature. When he's about to drown, he looks at everybody as the same. God says, you are all from the same father and mother. Yet you devised all these mechanisms to segregate. When in fact you are humans in brotherhood. What happened to you? So I say, why does a disaster have to take place before we start treating each other well? Why can't we treat each other before a disaster takes place? So that when a disaster does take place, then we treat each other even better. Am I out of time?
Yeah, tomorrow is like a couple
No.
minutes.
Oh, compliments? I don't really. What are the difference in thought about the Mahdi? You know, the Mahdi concept, the one who will come and establish justice, is a universal principle among all religions. Even Hindus believe in some kind of a person who's going to come and establish justice and equity. This is fascinating to me. Even atheists insist that justice is a fundamental part of our nature. To want justice is a fundamental part of our nature. Okay? And God speaks in the Quran, and in biblical terms too, that there will come His promise, where this earth shall be reversed from the point of view that the predominance of evil will become a minority and the predominance of good will become the status quo and the standard. And that requires leadership, divine leadership, because the complications of establishing such a united front will require divine authority, which is the concept of the Mahdi. Christians believe in the second coming of Christ. The Jews are waiting for the Messiah to come. The Muslims, Sunni and Shia, both agree that the Mahdi will come. In fact, both schools of thought agree that the Mahdi will come from the loins of Ali and Fatima. Fatima, as you know, was the daughter of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon her, and her family. And Ali, as you know, was the husband. And he was, of course, the father of all the Imams for the Shia, the ones who are appointed by God. So you find even both schools of thought do not dispute the fact that the Mahdi will come from that person. And he will come and establish justice. The two schools' difference is Sunnis believe that he's probably not born yet, will be born. The Shias believe he's already been born and he's been in occultation for 12 centuries. And he is on earth among us, waiting for the command of God to reappear to establish justice on earth. I hope I make sense. Yeah, as you know, the TMA is having this fundraising dinner. MashaAllah, I know the TMA group does fantastic work and tries to educate the community. And they, as you know, they're doing a fundraising dinner. I think it's essential, all of us, that we always support good organizations. Any organization that tries to broaden our vision, not narrow our vision, but broaden our vision, should be supported. And I don't care what community it is. It could even be a non-Muslim community. If they're working to broaden vision, we must go there and support. But charity always begins at home. And so those of us who understand the dynamics of how we as Muslims living in this Western society need to reach out to the world to inform them the proper message, I think it's essential that we support such organizations. So I definitely am with it. And I hope, yes, brother, I think this is the final question, then we'll end.
You just mentioned that application for quite some time. Do we need an application? Do we need the right of Imam Mahdi?
Do we need it? It's God's decree. Just like the same, do we need 2 eyes and not 3 eyes? It's God's decree. It's what is best. So the question is, do we need it? You know, it's situation based. You know, sometimes you find, for example, do we need to kill prophets? No, of course not. We should never kill prophets, right? But prophets were killed. So in principle what you find is, and because prophets were killed, or because representatives of God were killed, or they were punished, or they were beaten, then God has His measures of protecting them. And occultation is one of those measures, or one of those proofs also. And we find that from a theological point of view, the devil is unseen, right? He has been in occultation from the day we were brought on this earth. Very few people have actually seen him in the physical, right? So that occultation is still within the principles of all religions, major religions. If you look even in the Judeo-Christian faith, it's not disputed that certain entities are in the metaphysical realm, but they are present in spirit, and they do have effects on us. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Peace be upon you.